The last years I've been so focused on becoming my best self, feeling amazing in my body and being the healthiest version of me. And probably the biggest thing I learned so far is that it's not about making these huge, crazy changes. It all comes down to the small 1% daily habits. James Clear writes in his book Atomic Habits, those tiny things seem to make little difference on any given day because they almost seem too small to matter. But then you look back a few years later and you realize, wow, they had a huge impact. You really get to see the value of good habits and definitely also the cost of bad ones. Welcome back to another episode. It's almost November, and I feel like this time of the year, when it's soon the new year starting, it somehow makes you so inspired and motivated to kind of have this big life change, to create the life of your dreams. I love New Year's. I'm a total person who sets New Year's resolutions and who's like, new year, new me. But the thing actually really is that to improve your life and to become the best version of yourself, it all comes down to the small, tiny little habits we do every day. And in today's episode, I want to share with you 6 1% habits that I felt like had the most insane impact on my life. And it's 3 habits that are very focused on the mind and especially also our nervous system. And then 3 that are more centered around the body and our hormones. So 1% habits are these tiny things that have an insane compounding effect, especially over a long period of time. And that's exactly the tricky part because the most powerful outcomes are often delayed. So let's, for example, say you go to the gym for a week. You're not going to see any difference in your body, right? Same though also with you eat junk food for a week. You're probably also not really going to see a difference. It's first after a while. And so, for example, in the book, the author, James Clear, he compares it to imagining you're taking a plane and it's going from LA to New York. And if the pilot changes the route just by like 3%, going just a tiny little bit in a different direction, you're actually not going to end up in New York, but in Washington, D.C. So somewhere completely different. And even though in the beginning you won't notice it because it's just such a tiny change in degree, the outcome is a completely different one. And he wrote in the book, I really love this, so I'm going to quickly read it to you. Similarly, a slight change in your daily habits can guide your life to a very different destination. Making a choice that is 1% better or 1% worse seems insignificant in the moment. But over the span of moments that make up a lifetime, these choices determine the difference between who you are and who you could be. If you want to know where you will end up and kind of what your life will be like, you can look at your daily habits. They're a prediction kit for who am I going to become. I have become so crazy addicted to constantly either listening to something, watching something, like having a constant stimulus in a way, especially also connected to what I think is really this toxic productivity where you feel like you constantly feel like you need to do something. Like, for example, when I go for a walk, I have to listen to a podcast episode. I have to feel like I'm learning something. Same thing when I'm doing my makeup in the morning or when I'm cooking or cleaning or literally, I feel like whatever I'm doing, I have to do it while listening to something or sometimes even also while watching something, especially, for example, eating while watching something. And I think it's really crazy how uncomfortable I feel when I, so to say, not do anything. For example, just lying on the couch without watching anything or listening to something, or just sitting outside. How in my mind it feels like I'm wasting my time right now. I'm being super lazy. I'm not being productive. I'm not doing anything. When in reality, it's probably one of the most productive things we can do, especially in today's world where we are being so crazily overstimulated, right? We are receiving so much information, so much input every day. I just heard this recently that that on an average day, we receive so much information like 100 years ago, a person would receive during their whole lifetime. So that's absolutely insane and also reminds you that this is not normal. It's not normal to have this constant stimulation. Our brain actually needs time to not have anything from the outside and to process and to wander off and to think. And I definitely in my life am not giving my brain that time at all. If I do, for example, something that I want to do in terms of relaxing myself, it would be watching a show or scrolling on Instagram or TikTok. And I would think that it's kind of a relaxing thing to do, but it's just another thing that adds to the noise and that also really overwhelms the nervous system so much. And one thing where I can really see the impact of it for me is definitely falling asleep, because it's something that I've actually been struggling with for quite a while. And I feel like I've come to the root of why it is, because I would lie in bed and my mind would just go crazy and all these thoughts would come up, all these things I have to do. Also when you have these shock moments of like, shit, I totally forgot to call that person or to answer that person. And it kind of really goes through your body like this shock wave. And so I'm just lying in bed with all these thoughts circling around. And it got so obvious to me that it's because during my day, I don't allow my brain to actually think and to just be in silence. And I think another thing that it definitely also impacts is my creativity, especially also when creating content and consuming so much content all day long. I could really feel how I would feel so stuck and also so influenced by what everyone else is doing. And of course, also comparing myself so crazy much, which is another thing, right? A few years ago, we weren't able to see other people's lives as much as we do now. And we just weren't able to compare ourselves as much. And I think it's really absolutely no surprise at all that mental struggles like anxiety are so high, because we're just exposed to completely different things and just to so much more. The most important change I think I have made is to set super strong boundaries with my phone, especially also taking my phone out of the bedroom. Because I definitely used to be on my phone first thing in the morning, always. Like just the first thing I would just do is open my phone, check my WhatsApp, go to Instagram, and immediately you're being sucked into everyone else's lives and not being present for your own at all. And especially actually the first 10 minutes of our day are so important and so powerful, because it's this stage where you're still a little bit asleep, you're still kind of starting to wake up. So the brain is so super sensitive, and especially our subconscious is super sensitive to whatever we're being exposed to. So we want to be smart about that time and kind of feed our mind and our brain with something that helps us to feel inspired and excited about the day. So what I try to do is to think about my day ahead and just visualizing the best possible outcome. And also, for example, thinking about things that I'm grateful for and just really getting myself into a positive mindset, an excited mindset, instead of being sucked into something. Because also sometimes you maybe get an annoying message or you see something that maybe upsets you or makes you sad or whatever. And if that's the first thing you see in the morning, it just influences your whole day. And for me, it just literally ruins my whole day. I can really feel it impact my mood so much. So protecting these first 10 minutes in the morning, also, of course, protecting your last minutes of the day. So definitely putting the phone away at night and just, having these really strong boundaries with ourselves. And what I've also been really trying to practice is to do things in silence. And oh my God, it's so challenging. Wow, how can this be so difficult? It really says a lot, actually. So, for example, I'm trying to do things like cleaning or getting ready in the morning without listening to anything. Also, no music, no nothing, just being alone with my thoughts. And since I started doing that, I'm so surprised actually how many more ideas I've been having and just what is coming to my mind. And so just really implementing this 1% habit of doing things in silence without any distraction and allowing my mind to wander and to just be right here, right now. The 1% habit number 2 is a bit more body focused, and it's one of the best examples of how much more important consistency is over intensity. And it's stretching, which I am kind of an expert in because I'm a yoga and Pilates teacher, and I'm actually super passionate about flexibility and have been learning so much about it over the last years. And the number one learning for me was that it is so much more effective to increase your flexibility by practicing just a few minutes every day instead of once a week for, let's say, a whole hour. So you're gonna make so much more progress by having these small, regular stretching sessions instead of this really intense one. That's definitely one of the things that has helped me by far the most to increase my flexibility. And I actually quickly want to tell you why stretching is so beneficial and why it's one of these 1% habits that has so many positive impacts on every other area of life as well, because it's not just super good, obviously, for our health in terms of our joints and especially with aging, for our balance. It's also amazing for our heart health because it helps to reduce the stiffness in our arteries. And there's this super interesting study that really blew my mind because they found that if you are above the age of 40 or 50, I'm not entirely sure, and you cannot reach your toes with your fingers, you're more likely to have a heart attack than someone who can, like who has the flexibility to do that. So that's absolutely crazy, right? And then on top of that, it also helps with releasing emotions because we store so many emotions in our body, especially actually in our hips. So the hip flexors are the muscle that immediately tightens when you are in a stressful situation. Like let's say you're in traffic and someone cuts you off. It's those muscles in our hips that tighten immediately. So those are actually also some of the most like uncomfortable muscles to stretch because of all that tightness. And if you practice yoga, you might maybe also know that, for example, the pigeon pose where you stretch into your outer hips can release a lot of emotions. So sometimes people will start crying in a yoga class because it just has loosened a certain emotion in their body. Then it also calms our nervous system, instantly helps you to calm down and release stress. And it also improves our sleep quality. And I want to share one of my favorite ways of how I integrate stretching into my daily life because we're all so super busy. And what I love to do is when I watch something on Netflix or also on YouTube, to sit down on the floor and do a few stretches for maybe like 5 to 10 minutes, especially hamstring and hip stretches. I do, by the way, have a video on my Patreon that you can perfectly do while watching something. I'm going to link it for you down below. Maybe you have to do it a few times with sound, but then once you are familiar with the postures, you can just, put it next to you. And I just quickly want to say that the purpose of this is, of course, to focus on flexibility, and that going to a proper yoga class, for example, is something completely different because obviously if you stretch while you're watching something, you're not as mindful, you're not as focused on your breath and so on. So it's really about that flexibility benefit. But ideally, of course, we also practice yoga without any distractions and with being fully present. But I feel like that's just such a good hack. And it's also a way of habit stacking, which is such a powerful way to make sure you stick with a habit, is to connect it with something else. So whenever you watch something, you stretch. It's kind of like stacking those two habits together. The next 1% habit had such a huge impact on my sleep, on my hormones, on my overall well-being. It's again such a crazy compounding one, and it's to support our circadian rhythm with, first thing, to expose yourself to light, ideally sunlight, first thing in the morning after waking up. So making sure instead of staring into our phone in the morning, to get that daylight, even if it's not sunny outside or you live somewhere where you maybe don't have direct sunlight, it's still super beneficial to look up in the sky to just get daylight, Of course, it can be super challenging in the winter when you maybe get up when it's still dark. There is alternatives like having daylight lamps. So that would be one way to go about it. And then in the evening, we of course want to do the exact opposite and try to dim all the lights, especially overhead lights. So whatever light you have in your house that comes from the ceiling, try to switch it off at night and instead maybe lighting candles and having warm, small lights that you can really keep on the lowest setting to help our body produce melatonin, get ready for sleep, starting to feel tired. Of course, limiting screens as much as possible, maybe getting blue light glasses if you still have to look into a screen. I'm also a bit conflicted about reading devices like the Kindle. I still haven't been able to figure out if it actually does impact your melatonin production and has a negative impact on your sleep and on falling asleep. I do read on my Kindle now and then, but I also got this reading lamp that you clip onto your physical book, and it's red and apparently has nothing of the elements that normal light has, but it's just this special red light that doesn't interrupt your melatonin production or sleep quality. I'm definitely also gonna link that for you down below. It's so practical, especially if you are sharing your bed with someone who's maybe not reading or already asleep, because then it can of course be super annoying to turn on the light. And it's actually so much better to not have a lamp, but have this reading light. And if I am using my Kindle, I have it on like the lowest of the light settings. So I'm really paying super much attention to eliminate any light, because I can just feel how crazy of a difference it makes. And I think sometimes we maybe think it doesn't impact us that much. If you're, for example, someone who doesn't have any problems with falling asleep, whether they stare into their laptop or into a screen, the thing is, it's not just falling asleep, but it's also staying asleep and just our overall sleep quality that can be impacted. So you might think you're the lucky one, but I swear to you, it counts for all of us. And why we really should implement these habits to support our circadian rhythm is because I think one of the most important, definitely for me, is that it has such a huge impact on your energy. So if you, for example, tend to have these energy crashes or feel generally low on energy, it can definitely be worth a try to focus on improving your circadian rhythm. It's also super impactful on our gut, on our hormones, on our metabolism, our mood, our immune system. Super important for healthy aging, so for longevity. And another big thing that of course plays a super big role in that regard as well is the whole topic around caffeine. Because I think there's still not enough awareness around the fact that caffeine actually stays in our system and in our blood for up to 12 hours. So if you drink a coffee in the afternoon, it is still going to impact your sleep. And again, maybe not necessarily the time it takes you to fall asleep, but definitely your sleep quality. And so one super big rule and big non-negotiable I have is no caffeine after 12 p.m. So I try to, when I have coffee or matcha, to have it in the morning, to not have it before breakfast. Wow, it made the biggest difference on my hormones and on my cycle. Once I stopped having coffee on an empty stomach, I used to have coffee with oat milk, the one that really spikes your blood sugar, first thing in the morning. That's literally like, I think one of the worst things you can actually do for your hormones, especially as a female. So now I always make sure I have a high protein breakfast before I consume any caffeine. And on most days I have matcha instead of coffee. It just does really make a huge impact. First of all, the way it enters your body, because coffee really creates this spike where it's this huge shift in energy, and then also, of course, a huge drop, because if you have a strong rise, there's like it inevitably also falls, sometimes even lower than you started off. So sometimes you can feel even more fatigued. And with matcha, it's really nice because it enters your bloodstream really gently, and it's like a much smaller curve. And then it, of course, doesn't crash as much. And I found the best matcha in the world, because I know it's a total thing that there are so many people who don't like matcha, right? And I mean, that's totally fair. I do think that the chances are high, if you don't like matcha, you tried a bad one. So you should definitely give it another try, especially with the Oreo matcha. It tastes so nice, and it comes with collagen. So it's a combination of matcha and collagen that they have combined, which is perfect because it's such an easy way to consume collagen and make it a daily thing. It's amazing for your hair, your skin, your nails. I'm gonna put a link for the Oreo matcha for you down below, also with a discount code. So you can find it in the description and in the show notes. One last point on the caffeine is, of course, also the amount. So just being mindful about how much caffeine we're drinking. But I feel like we all know that, right? That if you drink too much, it just does make you much more anxious and jittery. And it also, unfortunately, really disrupts the hormones, because it increases our cortisol super much, especially, of course, in the morning, where our cortisol is anyway naturally rising a lot. Drinking too much is just gonna skyrocket that and then bring all our other hormones out of balance. The next 1% habit that is gonna quietly transform your life is something that we basically already talked about. But I think the effect it has, especially the crazy compounding effect, is to swap scrolling for reading whenever you can, especially in situations when you are sitting in a train or in a waiting room or lying in bed at night. That's, of course, a huge one. And I mean, we already talked about it, but swapping that with reading whenever you can It makes the most insane difference. Let me tell you exactly why. I felt like I knew kind of all the main benefits reading has, but I digged a little bit deeper to really find more science behind it. First of all, of course, it builds your vocabulary and the way you articulate yourself and the way that you can express yourself. It strengthens your memory and your long-term retention. It improves our focus and attention, and scrolling literally does the opposite. It removes all our focus. We're not able to consume anything anymore that's longer than 5 seconds almost, right? To put it drastically. But so really helps us to regain that focus and attention span. It strengthens our critical thinking, enhances our creativity and idea generation. It supports healthy brain aging, which of course, especially with age, is so important, especially also in terms of Alzheimer. It reduces stress and downshifts the nervous system. It supports our mood and resilience. It also boosts our motivation and self-efficacy, so our belief in our own capabilities. When we, for example, finish a chapter or a whole book, it's also just such a satisfying feeling and just really feels like such an achievement somehow. And of course, there are all kinds of different books we can read, but when we look, for example, at fiction, it helps us to grow our empathy because you put yourself into another character and you experience their life. It improves your communication skills and also helps so much with getting new perspective on things and just getting kind of like a whole new worldview sometimes. And with nonfiction, obviously, it makes you a lot smarter. You accumulate knowledge. Depending on what kind of book, it can improve your mindset, your relationship, your career, help you become the best possible version of yourself and just really work on yourself. And it also builds the identity of a continuous learner. And what I do is I always read 2 books at the same time. So I read a non-fiction book at night and trying to make it not too exciting, because when you read a book that's like such a page turner, then obviously you also cannot fall asleep. And then the nonfiction books, so especially kind of the self-development stuff and the things that also maybe get me motivated and excited and where I learn stuff, I try to have those more like during the day, especially in situations where I would maybe normally scroll or where you want to kind of distract yourself. But I also find it a super powerful habit to read maybe just 2 pages in the morning of a book that you know just gets you into the right mindset and just motivates you. Because again, just especially the 10 minutes, but our whole morning in general is so powerful on shaping our mind and just getting kind of in the best possible mindset to achieve your goals. I, by the way, created these 2 lists on Amazon, one with my favorite personal development books and one with my favorite fiction books. So especially I'm totally into like these rom-com novels. So if you like those kinds of books as well, you are gonna love these. And also please let me know your recommendations, whether it's the best self-development book you've read, but I'm actually currently really in high need of a good rom-com novel. So if you have a good recommendation, please let me know in the comments. Coming to the last 1% habit, which has become a huge priority for me, especially after I did my first yoga teacher training. Because what we did during that training is we would spend a whole hour every single morning doing breathing exercises. So we would sit in a circle and the teacher would guide us through these different breathing techniques. And I swear to you, I felt like a different person, like a completely different person afterwards. I felt so clear, so energized, so good, so present, just incredible. So I've been really trying to have this habit in my life of doing, even if it's just 1 minute of conscious breathing throughout my day. So especially again, also in the morning and in the night is when I try to find these moments of just taking, even if it's also just 3 conscious breaths of breathing fully into my rib cage, because that's also something we over the years completely kind of unlearn. Like when we're born as babies, it's completely natural to us actually to breathe fully into our diaphragm and to find that full expansion. And then the older we get, especially because of all the outside things with all the stress going on and everything that's happening to us, our breathing becomes so much more shallow and so much less deep. And that actually has very strong impacts on our whole health. Of course, our lung size, but also how much oxygen we're getting, how energized we feel. So it's really one of the most powerful habits to integrate into your life, to practice. First of all, just that deep breathing. And then there are specific breathing exercises that are specifically well. One of them is so easy. And if you are a listener of the Huberman Lab podcast, you already know this one. It's the physiological sigh, where you inhale through your nose twice and then kind of sighing out through the mouth. So that's the physiological sigh, and it has the craziest immediate effect on the nervous system. It immediately puts you into the parasympathetic nervous system. So that state where you are resting and digesting and where your nervous system is just calm. So that's one amazing one. Another one I really love is the 4-7-8 technique, where you breathe in for 4, hold the breath for 7, and then exhale for 8. This one has been found to have a crazy impact on the duration it takes for you to fall asleep. So it helps you to fall asleep much faster. And again, just overall helps you to feel a lot more calmer and release stress and all of it. Another one I really love is the Nadi Shodhana, where you breathe out, in and out through the different nostrils. And I have actually created a 10-minute video with my favorite exercises. Basically, I think it's those 3 on my Patreon. I'm going to link that for you as well. And I've also been thinking to create shorter ones so that you can really just have, even if it's just, these 1 or 2 minutes, the impact it has. Because again, it's this 1% habit that we feel like it cannot make a difference. It's so small, but because we do it regularly, it's gonna have the craziest impact, even if it's just this 1 minute, even if it's just one deep breath. Sometimes that's also all we need, just one conscious deep breath to release whatever is going on in your life right now. And it's, by the way, become something I always do when I'm in a queue. So when I'm standing somewhere waiting for something in a queue, instead of getting my phone out, I would try to do these conscious breaths, maybe doing one of these breathing techniques just in my mind and breathing in and out. And again, a way of habit stacking. So whenever I'm in a certain situation, this is the habit that I'm gonna do, which helps me so much with actually doing it and doing it kind of continuously and consistently. And yeah, those were my 1% habits. I really hope that they inspired you. I can't wait to hear your thoughts and your feedback. And I'm gonna see you next week. Thank you so much for listening.